Welcome to the Pint Glass Football Podcast.
This is Pint Glass Football, part of the Radcast network. I'm your host, Brad Fowler. What's up, PGF Nation? Today, we're putting a bow on our 2025 NFL draft coverage as we hand out our final draft grades for the AFC and NFC East and the AFC and NFC West, from some smart strategic picks to full-blown disasters. We're breaking it down, who came out on top and who fumbled the ball at the goal line. Joining me as always, though, a generational prospect who checks every box, my co-host, Alex Higdon. Alex, what is going on?
Nothing right now as I sit here watching my Knicks throw this game away. Stupid. But anyway, let's get into this West, because at least I have some positive things to say about perhaps the Raiders. We'll see.
Yeah, New York guy, of course, but a Raiders fan. Make it make sense. I don't know, guys. You tell me. But let's start in the NFC East. We're going to start with America's team, the Dallas Cowboys, of course. Let's get right to it, Alex, because I think there's kind of a mixed bag here with Dallas, and I'm curious your thoughts on what they did in this draft. I've got their grade as a B-. I don't think it was a terrible draft. I liked some of their picks, but I thought there were some questionable decisions as well. Going into this draft, I thought their biggest needs were running back, wide receiver, and corner. I know they had a hole at the offensive line position, specifically guard, but I didn't think it was as pressing of a need as the other positions I mentioned, but they decided to go with a guard here with pick 12. In the first round, they take Tyler Booker, the guard out of Alabama. Look, very good player. I just don't like the value at 12. I would have rather them traded down and maybe added some more draft capital, or just go in another direction altogether, taking a player like Matthew Golden at that spot, get one of the top playmakers to add to this offense. This class was loaded at guard and loaded at offensive tackles that projected to be guard, not at wide receiver. So I would have liked to seen them go in a different direction there. And like I said, not a shot at Tyler Booker. I think he's a good player. I just don't know about at 12.
Tyler Booker, this comes off as one of those safe Cowboys picks where they're hoping they get another Zach Martin type. I'm not saying Tyler Booker's Zach Martin, but the kid is good. The kid is solid. The kid is a leader, and they needed offensive line help desperately with the retirement of Zach Martin. Under the radar move, it's not sexy, especially for Dallas fans, especially for the team, but nonetheless a solid pick.
Yeah, now in the second round, I really like where they went here. With pick 44, they take Donovan Ezeraku, the edge rusher out of Boston College, a guy that we talked about a lot leading up to the draft because we both really, really like this guy. I think that's a great pick. He was the number 3 edge rusher on my board. This guy is a technician, very polished player, highly productive player. I had a first-round grade on him, so I think it was great value at pick 44.
Yeah, good pick. He's not going to be Lawrence that they had there before, because he's not strong enough to hold the edge against the run. So they're still going to have that problem, not being able to stop the run. But in terms of Dallas is up, you have 2 edge rushers that are going to pin their ears back and chase down the quarterback.
Now, I'm guessing you liked this third-round pick, too, Siobhan Revelle Jr., the cornerback out of East Carolina, because he was on your sleeper list. Late first-round grade for this guy. I think this is great value here in the third. This guy is long, athletic. He covers a lot of ground.
Yeah, I do like him. Obviously, he's coming off injury, so you're probably not going to see what this kid is until the 2026 season, because he's coming off that Achilles injury that he had. So it's not going to show right away, but in a position where they could possibly be looking at moving on from Trayvon Diggs next summer. Now you have somebody that you'll be able to slide right in. You'll be able to figure out what you want to do with Deron Bland. And they still do need cornerback help, because they still need to replenish if they plan on moving on from him. But this is what the setup is to me, is that they have this kid. He's going to take a year. You won't see it until the following year. But then that'll be a year where they're going to be looking to probably move on and trade Trayvon Diggs. This is what this is about. Follow the money, people.
Now, in the 5th round, they take Jadon Blue, the running back out of Texas. It's not that I don't like Blue. I didn't like where they took him here, because Devin Neal, DJ Giddens, and Damian Martinez were all still on the board. All of those players I just mentioned, I had a much higher grade on than Jadon Blue. So It's not that he's a bad player. I just don't like the value here. I think there was a lot better running backs on the board. I know they needed to address that position, but I thought that was a miss. Other players that I want to mention here before we move on, Johnny Cornelius, offensive tackle out of Oregon in the 6th round. I think this was a nice value pick. 3 years of starting experience at Oregon. Very, very good in pass protection. I thought that was a nice pickup. And I also think Jay Toaia, the defensive tackle out of UCLA, in the 7th round, I like taking a flyer on this guy because he's a big run stuffer nose tackle, which, like you mentioned, that's been a place that's been hurting for them on this defense. So, look, it's a late round pick. Don't know if he's going to pan out necessarily, but I like taking a flyer on a guy like that for a position they've been really needing to help with.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you. I thought Damian Martinez was slept on, and perhaps they might have had their eye on Jordan James, who went about maybe 3 picks before they picked. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's really who they had their eye on. He got picked a little bit ahead of where they thought, and they thought they were sitting in the right spot to get him.
Alex, what did you end up grading the Cowboys draft?
I gave them a B+ because I thought the first 3 picks were very smart, very typical, and they were all needs at those positions and very good players at those positions as well. So the first 3 picks, I was able to give them a B+.
All right, let's move on to the New York Giants. I didn't think an edge rusher was their biggest need. The only really strong unit for New York is the defensive front, and they take Abdul Carter at number 3. Now, look, a lot of people love this guy. We've talked a lot about him. I won't go too far into it, but I will say this. I've been saying I think he's a boom or bust player, not the can't-miss prospect that people think. I think he could be great. It certainly has the potential to be great, but I think there's some real red flags in his game. So once again, go back and listen to our pre-draft episodes if you really want to get my full evaluation on Abdul Carter. But didn't like the way they started this draft. And then I think it really gets messy here when they traded back into the first round at pick 25 to take Jackson Dart, the quarterback out of Ole Miss. I had a 3rd round grade on this guy, and I know you're not even as high on him as I am. And I don't like this guy very much either. So I think it's safe to say we're not a fan of this move. I just don't see a franchise quarterback on tape. Plus, they traded back into the first round to get him, like I mentioned, which I didn't think made any sense. Because when you look at where they traded to at 25, none of the teams in that range were going to take a quarterback. So I think it would have made a lot more sense. Look, if you wanted Jackson Dart, I thought they could have stayed put at pick number 34 early in the 2nd round and probably still got this guy. So not only do I not like the player, I really hate the aggressive move to give up capital to go get this guy when you have a team that has a lot of holes to fill and you're giving up draft capital for a guy who at best is a developmental prospect.
Yeah, absolutely. I wasn't high on him at all. Trading back into the first, I just didn't think that was smart at all. This was clearly the draft that the league as a whole told us, as they've been saying, that this is a draft full of backups for the most part with perhaps some starters. So they weren't reaching on a lot of quarterbacks in the first round as we saw. So the Giants stand alone here, trading back up to try to get Jackson Dart. I thought that was a bad move, and it does affect my grade for them.
And then in the 3rd round, they take Darius Alexander, the defensive tackle out of Toledo. This guy is a do-it-all defensive tackle. I think he's a sleeper in this class. I know you mentioned him when we were doing our defensive tackle rankings. I know you really like this guy. I thought that was a solid pick for them in the 3rd round. And in the 4th round, they take Cam Skattebo, the running back out of Arizona State. Tough, physical runner. I think he's going to pair really well with Tyrone Tracy, their rookie from last year who really came on and played well. But look, the rest of the guys pretty much just taking flyers on a lot of these guys in the back end of this draft. I was really, really not impressed with this draft at all because I just hated the aggressive nature to take Jackson Dart. I think their 3rd and 4th round picks are the only reason I'm not giving them an F. I actually contemplated it, Alex. I went with a D because I do think Abdul Carter has a lot of potential, and I understand the pick, I guess, at 3, even though you really don't need an edge rusher. There's a ton of other holes they could have filled. And then, like I said, those mid-round picks, I thought they found some value there, which kind of saved this from being a complete disaster But your final grade here for the Giants.
My final grade is just a C plus because, like you said, the Carter thing. Even though they have Thibodeau and those, this gives them flexibility. Who's Thibodeau's has been a good performer, but he hasn't been available enough. The Jackson Dart really knocked them down a lot. Darius Alexander brought them back up, and so did Cam. So it brought them up because they were, as you said, headed for a D. But Darius Alexander and Cam Scatterbo brought them back up to a C plus. And I want to also mention Thomas Fadone II. I think the Giants have two really good young tight ends in Theo Jackson from last year and now Thomas Fadone from Nebraska. I think underrated. Big guy was injured and came back, but I think they're building something there by getting Scatterbo. We know what they're going to do, but I'll save the rest of that for when we do our preseason takes.
All right, let's move on to the defending Super Bowl champs, the Philadelphia Eagles. In the first round, they take Jahad Campbell, the linebacker out of Alabama. This guy is athletic. He's quick. He can cover. I think he's really built for today's NFL. And I thought it was a nice value at 31. I thought this was a guy that could possibly go in the top 20. For him to be there late in the first, I thought this was a really good pick by them. Nakobe Dean is coming off a really nasty injury, and he's a guy that's had injury issues throughout his career, going all the way back to college football. So I think his time might be up soon, and I think this pick made a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely made a lot of sense there. And I don't think they had the luxury of doing that because of the Nakobe Dean injury, because the only linebacker of note that they have, because they lost a lot on Burks. I believe they lost another backup guy. I know Jeremiah Trotter Jr., his father of Eagle fame, is coming on and being developed, but they needed a guy to stand in there next to Zach Bond that had ability right away, because Nakobe Dean will not be ready for the start of the season.
Yeah, and Campbell might be a plug-and-play starter. He might be that good, and I think that might be what they're looking at here. I know Jeremiah Trotter, when he came out, you were really high on him, so maybe he develops as well, but either way, they're in good shape. I thought it was a good value pick. Now, their second-round pick at 64 overall, they take Andrew Makuba, the safety out of Texas. I think this is the perfect replacement for C.J. Gardner-Johnson. Big-time player, physical, hard hitter. I just think this is a great pick in the second round.
Yeah, I had him rated higher than, I'll just say, Nick E. He's a height, weight, speed guy, and I thought Makuba was a monster, and he showed up on every single play. Whenever you watch Texas, the guy flying in there at the beginning or at the end, his name was Makuba.
Yeah, fourth round, pick 111. They take Ty Robinson, the defensive tackle out of Nebraska. I like this guy's tape. High motor guy, really good athlete. He had 43 quarterback pressures. So he's a guy that can collapse a pocket. Just feels like the typical Eagles type of defensive tackle. I think he'll fit in there. Now, some of their later picks that I liked here, I like Miles Hinton, the offensive tackle out of Michigan. This guy is huge. 6'7", 323 pounds, tons of starting experience in the Big Ten with Michigan. I thought he could be a steal late in this draft. And then Cameron Williams, another offensive tackle out of Texas, a guy that I think is a developmental player for sure, not a ready-to-play guy. But in the sixth round, man, he's got a ton of upside.
And let's not forget, and I'm mentioning him, not that I'm high on him, they could not help themselves but take another Georgia player in the fifth round, Smail Mondon Jr. But I do like the Kyle McCord pick. I think that's a value pick in the sixth round. He was what I like to call my Brock Purdy of the draft, a guy that's nobody's thinking about, but I think he has the ability to start and come in this league and be developed should he get the chance. And yeah, Miles Hinton, nasty player like most Michigan offensive linemen. Nasty player, as you know, we're getting towards the end of Lane Johnson.
So, Alex, what do you have for your draft grade for the Philadelphia Eagles?
I gave them an A-. I have an A- for the good old Eagles.
Yeah, you know what? We're in the same ballpark. I gave them a B+. I thought it was a really, really good draft. And it's hard to argue with what Howie Roseman's been doing these last several years. The best roster in the NFL, and it just got better. Washington Commanders here. Let's wrap up the NFC East. I thought coming into the draft needed to address the edge rusher position, cornerback, and running back. But they decided to go offensive tackle, and I like this pick a lot here, especially, like I mentioned, when you've got a young quarterback, you've got to find a way to protect him. So they went and got Josh Connerly Jr. with the 29th overall pick, offensive tackle out of Oregon, allowed just 2 sacks the past 2 years. Quick feet. I mean, really quick feet for a big guy. I think he is a day one starter. Guys, I encourage you all, if you haven't already, go read his full evaluation that we have on our newsletter from our offensive line analysts here at PGF. Sign up for free at pintglassfootball.com. If you haven't already, we've got a great piece. You can really go in depth on his game, but I think this was a great pick for the Commanders.
Yeah, solid pick, a guy that we were both high on, especially when you look at that Penn State tape. But yeah, you're right. You got a young quarterback, you got to protect him. You traded for Tunsil, and now you have Josh Connolly, and now you have your bookends.
So second round, 61st overall, they take Trey Amos, the cornerback out of Ole Miss. This guy has elite speed, really good change of direction ability. He excels in press man. He's a technician, really sound, and he's got good ball skills too. I love this pick in the second round. A guy that was just outside my top 5. Very good player.
Yeah, and with this pick, they finally went to the right Mississippi school and got the cornerback. We know what happened the last time they visited the state of Mississippi. Sorry, Emmanuel Forbes. But this allows them to kick Mike Sandstrom, a guy that we were higher on last year that we thought was a plug-and-play player in the slot, but ended up having to kick outside because of the bad play they had from other players there. But now with Marshawn Lattimore and Trey Amos, they get to kick Mike Sandstrom back inside. And now they have a formidable 1, 2, and 3 at the cornerback position.
Yeah, and that's his natural position there at the nickel. And I think you're right. That's going to be a really good move for them in that secondary. Now, they didn't have a third-round pick, but in the fourth round at 128, they take Jalen Lane, the wide receiver out of Virginia Tech. This guy is an interesting player because he's built like a running back. And he actually took snaps at running back as well. So really interesting player here because I could see maybe a bit of a hybrid role, almost kind of a poor man's Deebo Samuel, a guy that played a lot in the slot. But regardless, I think he's an interesting weapon for this team in the mid rounds that I think if you utilize his skills, he could be a nice piece for this offense.
Yeah, this is a guy you can probably kind of give him, and I'm not saying he's Tyreek Hill, I'm just talking about the role with those jet sweeps and a lot of fun things you could do with him and the quarterback. And he's also, with that 4.34 speed, so he's going to be able to do a lot of things. He's more than likely going to be a slot guy, so it'll be interesting to see how when they get into a spread offense, how they use Deebo as well as Jalen Lane in some misdirection and who's getting the ball because they both seem to be able to do some of the similar things in the running game.
So what grade did you give the Commanders here?
I have the Commanders with a B+. I really like the first 2 picks. If we were grading by round, they would have gotten an A for the 2 top picks. Those guys are going to be day one starters.
Yeah, I'm with you. I got a B+ as well for the Commanders. I thought this was a really, really solid draft and a really nice job adding some value pieces. And like you said, some guys that can be early impact players. Let's go with the NFC West draft grades. And I want to start with the San Francisco 49ers. This is a team that had a lot of turnover this offseason. This was a team that in the mock draft, I had a really hard time figuring out what direction they would go because I thought there was just so many different places they could address. But they went with Mykel Williams, the edge defender out of Georgia. Very, very good run defender, big-time athlete. And I think this is the team that really needed help in that front seven and really kind of add some pieces around Bosa because he's really kind of the last star on that front. And I thought they needed to find somebody to kind of help bring some more heat off that other edge.
I did not like this pick at all. I think Mykel Williams is a workout warrior. I felt that they should have gone Kenneth Grant here or hell, even Walter Nolan. I know it just based on where he was drafted, it's a little bit early. Losing Hargrave and not having anybody else in the middle because currently right now their starting defensive tackles are Jordan Elliott and Kevin Givens. Let me know when you're happy about that. I know what they did later on in the draft that we'll talk about, but I thought Kenneth Grant would have been more impactful with Robert Saleh back in the fold, a guy that can motivate players. Having a guy like that in the middle of that defense, I thought would have been a better pick here.
Yeah, look, I'm not the biggest Mykel Williams fan, but Kenneth Grant at 11, man, that is so early. Now, I know he didn't go very many picks later, but we'll talk about him here when we shift to the AFC side because I'm definitely not as high on him as you are. I think he's a very good player. I did not think he was a top 15 player in this draft, though. But they did address the defensive tackle position, like you mentioned, in the second round with Alfred Collins, the defensive tackle out of Texas. This guy is big, powerful. He's got length and versatility. He showed that he can line up anywhere on that front four. So I think this was a nice value pick in the second round, and it addressed a need for them.
Yeah, so I knew, like I said, I knew we were going to talk about this later on in their draft. So they ended up getting a guy in Alfred Collins. So I do like the pickup here because I thought this was really the biggest need on that line there that they would have been able to get. So I like Alfred Collins here, 6'6", 332 pounds, a guy that's going to move that line.
Yeah, in the third round, they take Nick Martin, the linebacker out of Oklahoma State. This guy's tape is fun to watch, man. He flies around the field and makes plays. I thought that was a nice pick. They, as you can tell here, they went really heavy defense because then later in the third round, they took Upton Stout, the cornerback out of Western Kentucky. This guy is one of my absolute favorite sleepers in this draft. I think he's a guy that could start at the nickel day one and be an impact player.
Yeah, Brad, we were talking about picks and who's too early, who's too late. This wasn't a superstar draft, so I think some of these drafts you had to just go and get your guy. We know they were starved for players in the defensive backfield. We know they needed help up front, but as far as that back seven, that entire defensive backfield, with the exception of maybe Jair Brown, they definitely needed some help at. So they went and got it with Upton Stout. So I wasn't mad at that pick at all.
Yeah, another pick that I really liked here in this draft was a guy that we kind of mentioned on one of our earlier episodes. In the fifth round, taking Jordan James, the running back out of Oregon. You mentioned that was a guy that maybe Dallas just missed out on. They needed to add some depth to the running back room. Look, James might not be elite at anything, but he's really good at everything. And the guy has incredible ball security, like we mentioned on another episode, 0 fumbles at Oregon. So takes care of the ball, has nice speed, nice burst, can catch out of the backfield. I think he'll be a really nice piece to this running back room.
Yeah, he's going to be another piece. He's going to be a third string guy, depending upon Garindo's health, because Garindo showed that he can do some things there. But I also think that this is telling, and I know it's in the fifth, but it's still telling about what they think about Christian McCaffrey, is that I don't think he's back to where I guess they would hope.
Let's finish this up with our draft grade for the Niners. What did you think about this draft, Alex? What grade did you give them?
I teetered on with them with a D or D+, but wow. I'm going to go ahead and give them a C-. I don't like the first round pick. And remember, Mustafa, who was a guy that came on, they let Hayufunga go because this guy came, but he's also hurt. They did not address the defensive backfield enough, which has been a huge weakness for them, even during their prime years. They needed to address that position more because it wasn't addressed in free agency for the most part, and they didn't address it in the draft enough for me to up their grade. I think they missed the mark with Michael Williams, so I'm going to give them a C-.
Yeah, I have a B-. I'm a little higher on this draft because I thought Michael Williams is a guy that I think you had to take a swing on some upside because there weren't a lot of blue chip prospects in this draft. And at 11, they were kind of in no man's land where there's not really any quote unquote elite prospects left, but you needed to add an impact guy or at least a guy that had high upside to be an impact guy. And I think Michael Williams definitely could deliver that. Alfred Collins I really liked, and it addressed a need. I think Nick Martin was an underrated player in this draft. Like I said, a guy that just flies around and makes plays. And Upton Stout, I'm really, really high on because I think this guy is a big-time player. Let's put it this way. If he played at Kentucky and not Western Kentucky, he'd probably be a late first-round pick. I think he was getting slept on big time because he played at a small school. He is a really, really good player in the third round. Let's wrap up the NFC West here. Arizona Cardinals. Top needs entering this draft, I felt like were wide receiver, guard, and cornerback. But they went in a different direction early and took Walter Nolan with the 16th pick, the defensive tackle out of Ole Miss. I really like Nolan. I had him as my number 2 defensive tackle in this class. But I thought there was, like we talked about in our rankings episode, a pretty clear drop-off after Mason Graham, even though he was number 2. I think this still might have been a little bit of a reach at 16. But with that being said, one of the most gifted defensive tackles in this class.
This is a guy that I liked. I liked the pick. And I think, and there's a theme as we'll start to go through their entire draft that we see here, because Brad, they completely went in the opposite direction of anything that you thought they would do. But I do like the pick because of Jonathan Gannon being a defensive coach. They're going to play into his wheelhouse and try to help the defense, something they've been ignoring for a while. They've really been going heavy on offense, trying to get that line straight. But I like the direction here with Walter Nolan, and with the additions of Davlin Tomlinson and Calais Campbell, they have a nice rotation of big guys up front.
Second round, they go back to defense again with Will Johnson at pick 47, the cornerback out of Michigan. This is a guy that a lot of people thought might go in the first round, but we kind of expected him to slide. There was a lot of reports that this guy might slide into the late first or maybe early second, so not a total shock that he did. Really good player on tape. I mean, we talked about this guy during our quarterback rankings. For me, the 40 time, or should I say the lack of a 40 time, does concern me. I really wonder if this guy has the speed to be an elite guy at the next level. But in the second round, there's a lot less risk taking him there. So I don't hate that pick at all. In the third round, they go back to defense with Jordan Birch, the edge defender out of Oregon. This guy was a former 5-star recruit. Can play up and down the line, very versatile player, had a career-high 10 sacks last season. I was able to see this guy play live multiple times, and he's got speed, power, he's a disruptor, so I think this was a nice pick in the third round too.
Yeah, I dinged them for the Will Johnson pick because of some of the things I said early on. If you want to check that, just go back when we ranked our cornerbacks and how I felt about Will Johnson. I thought Benjamin Morrison would have been a better player here to team up with Max Melton, who's going to be a second-year player that they have out there. I thought he would have been a better pick here. Jordan Birch didn't have a problem with him. Again, as I said earlier, you'll see a theme in terms of what Brad thought they should do versus what they said they were going to do.
Fourth round, they take Cody Simon, the linebacker out of Ohio State. I thought this was another really nice value pick. The third and fourth round picks, I thought they really hit on some value here. Tons of big game experience at Ohio State. This guy's a leader, highly productive player. And then in the fifth round, they go back to Ohio State and take his teammate, Denzel Burke, the cornerback. Very, very good player in zone coverage and a nice value in the fifth round.
I like the Denzel Burke pick, again, addressing the defensive backfield. But one of the things that I'm interested in, I thought they would have gone safety a little bit higher here, because I think we're looking at the end of Budda Baker, whether he's a cap casualty or whether they trade him, because I don't see them bringing him back. He's under contract till he's 31. I thought they should have perhaps gone in a different direction here, where they would have had flexibility to trade Budda Baker, who's a prime player right now and eligible to probably trade for a second or third round pick to kind of really address the needs that you talked about they need to address that they didn't address in this draft.
All right, so what's your grade for Arizona here?
I gave Arizona a B+. I like Walter Nolan. And a B-. It's the Will Johnson and going after the safety. I like Keaton Crawford in the seventh round. I like him as a player, but I thought they had other opportunities to get other ones. But I had to ding them for Will Johnson. I just think he's not long for the league, just given his current style of play and what Jonathan Gannon likes to do.
Yeah, I gave him a B. I thought it was a pretty solid draft. Like you said, I thought there was some positions that they kind of ignored or didn't address until late in the draft, but I thought they did a nice job of finding some really good value players, especially in those mid rounds. So I considered dropping the grade a little lower, but I'd like some of those picks, and it kind of boosted it back up for a B. I thought it was all in all a pretty solid draft class for the Cardinals. All right, let's go to the Seattle Seahawks here. I had their top needs entering this draft at guard, center, defensive tackle, and wide receiver, and they addressed guard. Took the guy that I had mocked to them in my mock draft at pick 18, Gray Zabel, the guard out of North Dakota State. He was my number one ranked guard in this class. Another reason, by the way, that I didn't love the Tyler Booker pick. He's a versatile offensive lineman and a great pick here. I just think this is just one of those guys that's the right player, right place to pick him, and the perfect fit for what they needed.
Yeah, like you said, they needed guard. He's a guy that can be a little bit versatile on the line as well. They needed to address that. You bring in Sam Darnold. The one thing about Sam Darnold, we saw it last year when their protection broke down, they had problems and they started to fall. So you have to, now that you brought Sam Darnold in, you have to protect him. So I believe this was the right pick here.
Yeah, in the second round, pick 35, early in the second, they took Nick Amanawari, the safety out of South Carolina. Look, this guy has some holes in his game. And I know you're not the biggest fan of him, and we pointed out some of the red flags with this guy's tape as well. But he is a big-time athlete. And I think in the second round, I don't hate this pick. I think if he would have been taken in the first, I would have been a lot more skeptical. I think the fact that he falls into the second, it's not a terrible pick. The one thing I will say is he fits Mike Macdonald's scheme. So from that standpoint, because he likes guys with a lot of range, this guy can cover a lot of ground. And I think it's actually a pretty good fit schematically, bringing in a guy like this.
You will get no fight from me there on that and where he went, simply because of the coach and the fit. You're exactly correct.
Now, later in the second, they had another pick at pick 50. They took Elijah Arroyo, the tight end out of Miami. This was a guy that was just outside my top 5 tight ends. I know, Alex, you're a little higher on him than I am, but he's a very, very good player. He's dynamic with the ball in his hands and a guy that can really kill cover 2 defenses because he gets down the seam and can make plays downfield.
I dinged them here. I thought that given the defense that they've now switched to a full-on 3-4, available in the third pick after him was Nick Scroton, and I thought he would have been a better fit in that defense, going defensively for what Mike Macdonald likes to do.
Now, in the third round, at 92, they take Jalen Milroe, the quarterback out of Alabama. Now, I thought this was a perfect landing spot for him. This is a guy that's going to be able to develop behind Sam Darnold. Zero pressure as a third-round pick. I actually thought he would go a little higher than this. I thought somebody would be really intrigued with his upside. So I think the value, once you get this far into the draft, I thought it was actually nice value for a guy like this. And with a guy like Mike Macdonald, a former coordinator with the Ravens, I think he understands the blueprint for a player like this, and I think he'll have a plan in place on how to utilize this guy's skills.
Yeah, absolutely. Same sentiments there. I think he was having fits with Lamar in practice and saw what he developed into and having to scheme up as a defensive coordinator and understood that, and that's what he would like on the offensive side for him.
A couple players later in this draft that I really like. In the 5th round at 142, they took Riley Mills, the defensive tackle out of Notre Dame. 7.5 sacks at defensive tackle last season. A guy that can move around a little bit on the defensive line. I thought that was nice value in the 5th. And then, of course, in the 7th round, Damian Martinez, the running back out of Miami. One of my sleepers that we talked about on an earlier episode, and of course on the newsletter. This was great value in the 7th round. I thought he was a guy that could possibly go as early as the 5th or maybe 6th round at the latest, but this guy has the potential to become a feature back. I think he's that good of a player. And in the 7th round, I thought that was a home run pick. Now, they had 2 other 7th round picks that I actually like too, Alex. Mason Richmond, the offensive tackle out of Iowa, I thought was really nice value. And Ricky White, a wide receiver out of UNLV, is another player that I think offers some nice value late in this draft. So all in all, I thought this was a really pretty strong draft by the Seahawks. What did you think as far as the grade for them?
I liked everything that they did for the most part. B-. I probably would have had them closer to an A-, B+, if not for what they did in the second pick in the 2nd round there. That's just too high for that player for me. But, Brad, let's be clear. They're going to be an interesting team to talk about. That is a very strong running room with Damian Martinez, Zach Charbonnet, and Kenneth Walker.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm in the same range. I'm a little higher on this class, but not a whole lot. I gave him an A-. I thought this was a really, really solid draft. And like I said, because not only did they find players that I think really fit what they needed, but they found a lot of value throughout this draft. All right, let's shift to the LA Rams. Now, some of the top needs for them entering this draft I had written down at linebacker, cornerback, offensive tackle, and possibly quarterback. I just don't know if they did enough to address those spots, but they got a deal done with the Falcons to trade back, getting picks number 46, 242, and a 2026 first rounder for picks number 26 and 101. Look, I love that deal for LA, really setting themselves up well for next year's draft, which quite frankly might be a lot stronger than this class. In the 2nd round, they ended up taking Terrence Ferguson, the tight end out of Oregon, with the 46th pick. My number 3 tight end in this class. He's the most athletic tight end in this class. He showed it at the combine. He's got great tape. I think he's really going to be a good fit in this offense.
Yeah, and let's remember last year the Rams were trying to trade to get Brock Bowers. He had zeroed in on him. So now he gets his tight end in the 2nd round. And I think it's clear that the Rams made it very clear that they were not in love with any quarterback in this draft.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with that extra first rounder going into next year, I think they've given themselves enough ammunition that if there is a quarterback that they want to target in the first round next year, they'll have the picks and the capital to maybe go after a guy. So I think they really set themselves up well there. In the third round, they took Josiah Stewart, the edge rusher out of Michigan. This guy had a 27.7 pass rush win rate, which is incredible. You want to talk about a guy that gets home, big time production from this guy, very good value in the third round. I like that pick for them. And then in the fourth round, Jarquez Hunter, running back out of Auburn. This was interesting. This pick didn't make a lot of sense to me, Alex. I mean, look, this guy's a tough runner. It's not that he's a bad player, but this is a crowded Rams backfield. And then you also throw in the fact that Dylan Sampson was still on the board. I personally had a much higher grade on Dylan Sampson than I did Hunter, so didn't love that pick in the fourth round.
Yeah, so the Josiah Stewart, that's going to be another position that not position, but a player that I talk about on a line with Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham. How good is he really when he doesn't have that? However, to be fair, he's now coming into a line that'll have Brandon Feast, Kobe Turner, and then on the edges, Byron Young, as well as Jared Verse. So perhaps he gets to see a lot of the one-on-ones that he was seeing previously when he was at Michigan with all of those type of guys.
All right, Alex, what was your grade for the LA Rams?
I gave the Rams a C+. I completely agree with you. They needed to address the defensive backfield, and they refused to the entire time, whether it be safety or anything in the DB. They signed a couple of UDFAs, but they needed to really address and get a playmaker in that defensive backfield.
I gave him a B-. I love the Terrence Ferguson pick. I think Josiah Stewart was a nice pick. After that, not super impressed. So I'm with you. I was actually thinking almost the same thing. I was thinking C originally or C+, but then I factored in that trade. And I factored in the fact that they fleeced the Falcons for those extra picks, especially getting another first rounder, which we know is so valuable. I bumped their grade up to a B- because of that fact. Let's shift gears to the AFC West. Let's start in LA with the Chargers. First round pick, 22nd overall. They take Omarion Hampton, the running back out of North Carolina. He was my number one running back in this class. That's right. I have him ahead of Ashton Genty just slightly, even though they're both really good players. But if you guys want to go back, listen to our pre-draft episodes once again. Go to our running back rankings episode if you want my full evaluation on him. But this to me was a home run pick.
I'm a little torn here, and it's not about the player. It's just about I thought that they had a lot of needs here. Now, Omarion Hampton is definitely a first round pick. But I guess if you just want to go with the fit and what he likes to do, then Omarion Hampton is the right pick here. I just felt they should have gone in a different direction, that they had needs specifically on defense, that there were better players there. But for the fit and the coach, it makes sense.
Yeah, I'm surprised you said that because we saw the defense take a huge step forward last year and become one of the best defenses in the NFL. I felt like what really held them back last year was just a lack of weapons around Herbert. So I actually like that they went in this direction here, and especially going with wide receiver in the second round here with Trey Harris. And I like that they went offense early in this draft because I thought they needed to address it and really start getting some playmakers. They just didn't. Look, Ladd McConkey was a really good rookie. Their offensive line has some guys for sure after bringing in Joe Alt. Rashawn Slater's a great player. I just felt like they lacked some juice in this offense. And I like these two players here. Trey Harris, the wide receiver out of Ole Miss, I thought was a really nice pick. He's on my sleeper list. Playmaker, a receiver with size, speed, and a really polished route runner. I think this is a guy that wasn't getting enough talk going into the draft and a guy that could be a really big impact player right out of the gate.
Yeah, you said it right there. They needed another, because as good as people thought Justin Herbert was last year, he threw as many interceptions in that playoff game as he had thrown all year. So yeah, you had to go in this, and you had to go get a playmaker, a guy on the edge that can do some things. So I think bringing in Trey Harris here was a good fit.
Yeah, in the third round, they go to the defensive side of the ball and take Jamari Caldwell, the defensive tackle out of Oregon. This guy is a big, tough nose tackle who can really play the run, but also can push the pocket. He had 22 pressures last year. Another guy, I was able to see him play live multiple times. Man, he is big and a big disruptive player up front.
Yeah, I like that pick as well. Obviously, Harbaugh just only 1 year removed college, so he has his pulse on what type of player that he wants, that he's been seeing out there, and Jamari Caldwell fits that style.
Yeah, now I'm curious your thoughts on the 4th round pick, Kyle Kennard, the edge out of South Carolina. Man, South Carolina had some guys.
Yes, they did.
Man, you look at this draft, it's like they had so many good players. It almost makes you wonder why they didn't make more noise in the SEC. Look, I know it's a great conference, but these guys had some dudes, because Kyle Kennard is a really good value in the 4th round. This is the guy that I had in my top 100 players in this class. So you get him at pick 125. Once again, I think really nice value. And this guy was productive, 11 and a half sacks last season.
Yeah, we said that this draft, because it wasn't star-studded up top, we said this specific draft is definitely going to be one between the 3rd, 4th, and 5th rounds. Go back and take a look at how many South Carolina players had been taken between the 3rd and the 5th round.
Yeah, and then in the 5th round, they take Keandre Lambert-Smith, the wide receiver out of Auburn. This guy's a burner, ran a 4.37 40-yard dash. He can take the top off the defense. So I like getting a guy like that because they needed some more speed and some more juice, like I mentioned, in this receiving room. So I thought that was a nice value there in the 5th round. Another couple players I want to mention here, R.J. Mickens, the safety out of Clemson in the 6th round. I think this guy could be a steal. I'm a little shocked he fell this far. Let me rephrase that. I'm actually very shocked that he fell this far, because this was a guy that was just outside my top 100 players. You get him at pick 214, I think is tremendous value. I think this is a guy to circle because he could be a difference maker, especially for such a late pick. And then Trequezie Bridges, the safety out of Florida. Alex, I know you're a Florida guy. This is your team. I'm curious your thoughts on him, because once again, another very late pick, but I think he's a sleeper at safety.
Yeah, he could possibly be a sleeper at safety. I mean, he's a tweener because he can also cover. Because if you remember, he played at Oregon and only fought for one, where he was a DB, and we converted him to a safety, where he's just more of an in the box guy, but he has the ability to cover on the outside. So you can be versatile with him if you want.
All right, so what did you think of this Chargers draft? What was your grade for these guys?
I gave the Chargers a C+. I know that's going to shock a few people because they did do very well late. I just thought that 1st round pick is going to be a problem for me, even though it's a fit for the coach. But I'll just say this, and I know I'm being long-winded here. They lost a lot of people in that defensive backfield. So now your cornerbacks are Benjamin St. Just, who was a bust in Washington, which is why they got rid of him. And then you also have Dante Jackson out there. So this is your defensive backfield. It's just Derwin James in the back out there, and that's it. And you also lost Joey Bosa, even though he was hurt. He was hurt a lot. So now you have your Junior Colson, who's a guy that you just drafted because he was a hometown pick for you as a slotted starter at the moment. I think this defense is going to take a step back simply because they don't have the horses on the defensive back end to start, and not enough rushing up front to balance it out. So I know they were good last year. I don't think they're going to be this good this year, but they will for sure be better offensively. Again, that's not a knock against Hampton. I just don't like the direction that they went in because they needed so much more on defense.
Yeah, we're definitely on opposite ends here. I gave him an A grade. I think this is one of the best draft classes in the NFL this year. Omarion Hampton is an absolute stud. Like I said, number 1 running back in this class. If he would have went in the top 10, I would have been fine with it because I had that kind of grade on him. So at 22, I just think it's too much value. I get what you're saying about the secondary, but there wasn't a corner or safety at 22 that was worthy of that pick. And when you've got a guy like Hampton that falls that far, I just think it was way too much value to ignore. And then when you go down the rest of this class, like I said, picks 2, 3, 4, 5, all I thought were all really, really good picks. There's not really a pick I dislike in this draft. I thought they just did a great job. And then, like I mentioned, even in the 6th and 7th round, they found some guys that I thought could be sleepers in this draft. So I'm a little surprised you're that down on this class. I just thought they did a great job from start to finish finding guys that could be contributors and guys that could play right away. Let's move to the Kansas City Chiefs. And they start out this draft addressing a position that I felt like they absolutely had to get, which is the offensive tackle position. They take Josh Simmons, the offensive tackle out of Ohio State. Now, I know I'm higher on him than you are, Alex. I think if it wasn't for the injury versus Oregon, I think he would have been a top 15 pick. I think They got an absolute steal here, taking him at 32. And like I said, it's a position they had to address. This guy's maybe the best athlete of any of the offensive tackles in this class. And this was a position that I think has been a weak spot for them. It got highlighted in the Super Bowl, but I think it's been a weak spot for at least a couple seasons now. They had to do something here, and I think it was the right move taking Simmons.
Yeah, absolutely. We knew it had to be tackle. Before you even get to which player, we knew it had to be tackle. I wasn't high on him, and it really wasn't because of his play. It was really because of the injury, and they need that position. So I probably would have opted for the Minnesota tackle here over him, and that's really based on injury, not necessarily who's the better player. I just would have I needed somebody that I could trust. I know they brought on Jalen Moore from San Francisco to ease Josh Simmons in, but I just would have gone there.
All right, I'm curious your thoughts on the second round pick here. With 63, they took Omar Norman Lott, the defensive tackle out of Tennessee, pass rushing 3 tech. I don't think either one of us, if I'm not mistaken, Alex, I don't think either one of us were as high on him as some other draft analysts, not as high as the consensus had him. But this is the guy who can get after the quarterback, had an 18.9% pass rush win rate. So he's a disruptive player, and they could certainly use a guy like this up front.
Yeah, we know they lost Derek Nandi in free agency, but I also think this is a quick look at what's coming down the pike when you start looking at Chris Jones, who's going to be 33 this year, that they perhaps are trying to ease a guy in that they think that they can coach up, that they wanted to get early because of the production that you just spoke about.
Now, I'm going to go down a little further in this draft because there's a couple players that I like here. Jalen Royals, the wide receiver out of Utah State, they took in the 4th round. I think this guy's a sleeper in this class. I think he was a top 75 player in this draft. To get him at 133, great value in my opinion. They need more weapons. This is a guy who can play in the slot or he can play outside, and he was really impressive at the Senior Bowl, so I'm a little surprised he was available this late. In the 5th round, they took linebacker Jeffrey Bossa out of Oregon. This guy is a locker room leader, a really good blitzer, and I think he really fits what Spags likes to do with his linebackers. And Brashard Smith, the running back out of SMU, is another guy to circle here. I think he could be a sleeper, but I'm a little bit shocked that they didn't address running back earlier. And that's not a shot at Smith. I think he has the potential to be a nice late pick, but I thought they needed to add somebody in the middle rounds here, and they missed.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you. I thought they should have gone running back earlier. I would have thought a DJ Giddens would have been a great pick there. But as we are still going through free agency and there's still trade season, you see a come across the ticket that Breece Hall and Kansas City are linked. So maybe they have something more on the trade market than they thought in the draft.
So grade-wise, what did you go with for Kansas City?
Kansas City had an interesting draft. It was hard for me to grade. I went anywhere between a B+ and a C-, and I settled on a B- here. Like, it really picked up towards the end when they got Jalen Royals. And I do like Noel Williams. I think he's not necessarily a sleeper, but I think he was picked in the right spot there. He kind of fits what Steve Spagnuolo likes to do. But I like the Jalen Royals pick. They needed to get more dynamic at wide receiver, even with Rashee Rice coming back, because that's another, draftee or free agent, if you want to talk, that they're going to add back. And they've not got anything from Sky Moore. They have a lot of these same type of guys that have not delivered. And I think Jalen Royals fits exactly what Reed likes to do in his offense.
Yeah, this Kansas City team has really missed on a lot of big draft picks in the last couple seasons. And it's starting to catch up with this roster. So I think this was a very important class. They need a lot of these guys to hit. And I think it's a good class. It's a solid class. I'm with you. I had a B- written down. I don't think it's a bad class. I think it's a little underwhelming, but I do like the direction they went with some of these players, and some of those late picks kind of kept it from falling into the average range, so to speak. Now, how about your Las Vegas Raiders, Alex? In the first round with the 6th overall pick, they take Ashton Jeanty. No surprise here. He was the guy that most people had mocked there. I had him mocked there as well. I just thought, once again, go back and listen if you want the full evaluation. We won't get into it here. But I think he's a great player and a great fit for the Raiders here.
Yeah, everybody knows that I wanted Mason Graham, but once that trade happened and then the Browns ended up picking Mason Graham, and they tried to trade back, wasn't able to trade back. At this point, you have to go BPA. So even myself, who was against drafting running backs in the first round, would have been pigeonholed and had to draft Ashton Jeanty. Not a shot at the play. I think he's a great player, great prospect. But even as the GM there, I would have had to draft Ashton Jeanty.
Yeah, in second round, pick 58, they take Jack Beach, the wide receiver out of TCU. This is a guy who can make big plays downfield, and he's really good in the contested catch situations. So I like that pick. A couple other players that I want to mention here. Caleb Rogers, the offensive tackle out of Texas Tech. I like that pick because I think it adds some nice depth to the offensive line, as well as the next pick in the third round, Charles Grant, another offensive tackle out of William and Mary. Just a very solid player with depth to the offensive line. And Alex, I know you had him on your sleeper list, but the thing I like about him is he has big upside. I don't think he's developed into the player he can become. Very nimble, light on his feet for a big guy, very technically sound offensive tackle. I think he has significant long-term potential here.
Yeah, and like I said, this draft would be one of the third, fourth, and fifth rounds, and the Raiders had 3 third-rounders and 2 fourth-rounders. I don't want to skip over Darian Porter, who is a prototypical 6'3" DB that fits the Pete Carroll mantra of how he likes his DBs. You know how I've already felt about Charles Grant. I thought Dante Thornton Jr., we don't have any outside receivers right now on the Raiders, so this is a guy that's going to who can only run 2 routes. There's the deep post and a 9 route. That is it. He cannot run the route tree. But for what our team is set up to do in terms of the running game, he's only going to need to run those old routes. And then I mentioned South Carolina again. There goes that man, Tonka Hemingway from South Carolina in the 4th round. And the most interesting player in our draft, out of all our draft picks, JJ Pegasus. This guy played all over. He's going to be a DT, but he was running back. He was fullback. He was basically all over the field on offense for Ole Miss.
Yeah, the only pushback I'm going to have is the most interesting pick to me was in the 6th round, Tommy Millott, the wide receiver out of Montana State. And the reason I say that is just keep a lookout for this guy. Very athletic quarterback at Montana State and a guy that they're going to convert to slot receiver. And look, we've seen other guys do this in the past, from guys like Julian Edelman, Antoine Randall L., guys that played college quarterback but were really good athletes and converted to that slot wide receiver and actually ended up becoming very good players in the NFL. So there's a blueprint for this, and I think he's a guy to watch here as a late round pick. But you mentioned Dante Thornton Jr., the wide receiver, and how he's mostly a deep route guy. That's absolutely true. But when you think about Geno Smith, he is at his best off play action. So what do? You go get an elite running back prospect and a home run hitter. That makes a lot of sense on paper for what this team could be when you start talking about running the ball and setting up the play action for Geno Smith.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right about Time Miller, that 4.39 speed in the slot that's going to be all over the place. And it'd be very interesting to see what Chip Kelly does with a lot of new toys. Obviously, Brock Bowers already being there, and Jacoby Myers that registered no drops. As for a grade, drum roll, please. Probably since the first time I've been on here with Brad, I am actually giving the Raiders an A on their draft. I like what they did. They got players that fit the scheme of what Pete Carroll likes to do. I love the pickup of Charles Grant. You know, we could be losing a left tackle soon, so they're going to be able to groom him and see whichever way they want to go in that direction. But the picks all make sense, and guys that feel like they can contribute, maybe not all be starters, but contribute right away.
Yeah, no, this is one of the better draft classes they've had. And like you said, this is season 3 with us together now, season 7 for the show. But, season 3 with you being on the show as a co-host. And I don't think either one of us have had a very good grade for any of these recent Raiders classes. So it feels like there's a new direction with this team. Obviously, you bring in new leadership with Pete Carroll, new OC, and now Brady kind of putting his fingerprints on this team as well. It feels like the Raiders finally have some real football guys in the operation and guys that have a path and a plan in place for what they want this team to be. And it's got to feel good if you're a Raiders fan, because I'm with you. I think this is a really solid draft. I had a B+ written down. I like the A grade because I think we're in the same ballpark here. This is one of the better drafts that we've seen from them in a long time. All right, let's wrap up the AFC West with the Denver Broncos. In the first round, they took Jahdae Barron, the cornerback out of Texas. Look, we both love this guy. I mean, the tape is fantastic. 5 interceptions last year, versatile player, cover defender, can cover a lot of ground. This is just a great pick to start this draft class. And when you pair him up with Pat Surtain on the other side. Now you're looking at what could be a dynamic 1-2 duo at the cornerback position.
Yeah, and if you look out there, what they're doing in Denver, they're creating a no-fly zone out there. You bring in Jahdae Barron, who you can put in the slot, who can also play outside. You bring in Haifunga if he can stay healthy. And you also remember, let's not forget, they got that guy, that defensive player of the year, Patrick Surtain. They're slowly creating a no-fly zone over there in Denver.
Now, in the second round with pick 60, they went running back. I thought they would go running back there at pick 20. I thought that was kind of the spot that I had circled for Marion Hampton. I thought that would have been a perfect landing spot for him. They had other ideas going with R.J. Harvey, the running back out of UCF. Look, the Alvin Kamara comp is the perfect comp. I mean, when you watch this guy's tape, you see a lot of shades of Alvin Kamara. So I know you really like this guy, Alex. I like the player too. My only knock on this pick is they might have took him a little early. There were a lot of really good backs still on the board. We talked about how deep this running back class was. And look, it's not a shot at Harvey, but the one thing I will say to kind of defend this pick is he might be the perfect fit for this offense and what Sean Payton's looking for in a running back. But it was a little early, but I'm thinking maybe they thought, hey, if we wait till the third round, he might not be there. So I don't hate it from that standpoint.
Yeah, there's two ways to talk about it. Same way I talked about Marion Hampton. There's what I like and what I thought they probably could have done here. But as far as a fit, this guy does fit exactly what Sean Payton likes to do. He's a three down back, especially on third down when you can put him out there in space and make some moves, a la, to your point, to Alvin Kamara. He's going to be able to do a lot of those things.
Yeah, in the third round at pick 74, they take Pat Bryant, the wide receiver out of Illinois. Another guy, I was able to watch him play live last year. Really good player. I thought the one thing that stood out, though, was the 4.61 40-yard dash time. I was surprised he ran that slow. He doesn't look slow when you watch him play live, and maybe he's one of those guys that plays faster than he runs, but a really good player. My only knock is I think it might have been a reach in the third round. A lot of good wide receivers are still available, so not sure I love that pick. And then later in the third round at 101, they take Savion Jones, the edge rusher out of LSU. Unbelievable motor, which I know you love in an edge rusher. So do I. I want to see guys that consistently get after it. Man, this guy never turns it off.
Yeah, I think the Pat Bryant, they had to go wide receiver because let's remember, Cortland Sutton's not supposed to be on this team. This is really supposed to be Tim Patrick's team right now, but because there's two injuries, they held on to Cortland Sutton. So that's what you're seeing here. But I think that's what they kind of see in Pat Bryant. He's big. He's kind of prodding a little bit, but he does have the hands to do a lot of things that Cortland Sutton currently does because they'll be moving on from him after this year. They have their speedsters and Marvin Mims. They wanted that possession receiver, and you're absolutely right. Savion Jones, you could just describe him one day. He does not stop coming forward.
So what's your grade for the Broncos?
I gave the Broncos a B-. And it's not necessarily for anything in particular. I just thought they had a draft, 1 through 3. I know that Pat Bryant can knock them down maybe to a B-.
I thought the exact same thing, B-. I thought really good picks, guys that made a lot of sense, guys that fit what they want to do, but not a ton of big splashy moves outside of their first round pick. But all the other picks do make sense. Now let's wrap it up with the AFC East here. Our final draft grades, of course. Let's start with the Buffalo Bills, the team that's been running this division now. And with the 30th overall pick, they take Maxwell Harrison, the cornerback out of Kentucky. I love this pick. They had to address corner. I thought this is where they would go. This guy has elite traits, speed, length, really good player, and I think it's really what they need in the secondary.
Yeah, that secondary has been decimated ever since the injury to Tre'Davious White. He hasn't been able to return to form, but now you bring in a guy that can come in and play day one that you're going to be having some expectations of because that defensive backfield has really been destroyed over the past 3 seasons.
So in the second round at pick 41, they take TJ Sanders, defensive tackle out of South Carolina. I swear, it seems like every single guy for South Carolina got drafted. At least everybody on defense got drafted off this team. It's unbelievable. Just outside of our top 5 defensive tackle rankings, a 3-tech, can get in the backfield in a hurry, a disruptive player. But my only knock here was I think this was a bit of a reach for a player that Look, I like the player, but where they took him, I think this is a guy that's probably still available in the third round, maybe even the fourth round. I think he still would have been on the board. So this kind of felt like a reach, even though I do like the player.
Yeah, I can agree with that as well. Like I said, a lot of the South Carolina guys were really third, fourth, and fifth guys. I would have thought Alfred Collins, who went a pick later, would have been the better pick, or even Shamar Turner, who went 2 picks later after that, would have been a better fit here. But they do need help at the defensive tackle. They have a bunch of Ed Oliver is a pass rusher. He's not necessarily a run stuffer in that 4-2 that they're going to play. So they needed a big body up there to stop the run.
Now, in the third round, pick 72, they take Landon Jackson, the edge defender out of Arkansas. This guy is a sleeper. And look, our friend John told us to circle this guy's name, and we watched the tape, Alex, and this is a guy that could be a steal in the third round. He has length, he has bend, and he was really impressive at the combine.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think getting him there was a perfect pick. This is a guy that you can stick behind Joey Bosa. Joey Bosa, unfortunately, he is an injury-riddled player, so he more than likely is going to see some snaps early and perhaps often, just given how healthy Joey Bosa can stay and if AJ Espinoza can ever live up to any hype he ever had.
A couple other players I want to highlight here in the fifth round, Jackson Hawes, the tight end out of Georgia Tech. This guy is an elite blocking tight end. And I think he's a guy that really helps the offensive line because I think he'll be basically an extension of the O-line. And I think it's going to allow the Bills to play a lot more 12 personnel, which is something I think they want to do and become more balanced, like we've seen in the last year or so, become a little more physical, a little more run-centric. And I think this will really allow them to do that.
Yeah, and you know what, Brad? In the fourth round, they ended up getting Deion Walker, the huge defensive tackle, a guy that is a truly run-stuffing DT, what they really need.
He is a good player and something they needed to address. Now, the last player I want to mention here in the seventh round, Caden Prather, the wide receiver out of Maryland. I like Prather as a late pick here. Another guy, I also saw him play live, a good player who can separate, but I was actually surprised that they waited so long to address wide receiver. So as much as I like Prather and I think it's a nice sleeper pick, I thought they had some opportunities in the middle rounds to maybe add a receiver earlier than they did. So that was something that surprised me a little bit. But all in all, pretty impressive class for the Bills. What's your grade here for Buffalo?
They would have been an A had they gone, like I said, Alfred Collins, Donovan Azaruka was available. Hell, even Makuba, because their safeties they're still right now, they're penciled in to start DeMar Hamlin again at the safety position, and Taylor Rapp is the other safety position. So I thought they could have gone Makuba in that second round. I don't care if he was taken late at 32. He was worth the 9th overall pick in the second round. He was just that good. And as far as what you said about the wide receivers, I don't think you want to say that too loud before you get a call from Brandon Beane. But all in all, I gave them a B- on their grade.
Yeah, I had B- written down as well. So we're definitely aligned when it comes to them. I thought it was a good draft. A couple things that maybe could have been different, but very, very solid draft for the Buffalo Bills all around. All right, let's shift to the New York Jets here. In the first round, with the 7th overall pick, they took Armand Membo out of Missouri, the offensive tackle. I think, quite frankly, Alex, this was an overrated prospect. It's not that he's a bad player. He's a very good athlete, but he's a guy that's a little more of a developmental prospect than I would like to see from the 7th overall pick.
Yeah, I agree with that. And plus, I also think that he's probably going to grade out better as a guard and just okay as a offensive tackle. I think when they decide to finally kick him into guard, then we're going to see the player that you thought you were going to see at tackle.
Yeah, I tend to agree as well. I don't, like I said, it's not that he's a bad player. I just, at 7, I just think that they could have gone in a totally different direction there. Now, in the second round, pick 42, they take Mason Taylor, the tight end out of LSU. He was my number 4 ranked tight end. I know you had him number 4 on your top 5 list as well. Good player, but here's my pushback. Terrence Ferguson was just a few picks later, and I personally think he's a better athlete and a better prospect than Taylor. No, look, Taylor's a good player. They had a hole at tight end, so I don't dislike this pick. I just knock it slightly because I think there was a better player available.
Yeah, and they needed a tight end, and I think they might have, to your point, reached here because if he was fourth on ours, the top two were already gone, and then Elijah Rojo also went in the second round as well. So it might have looked like they reached now, but when it played out, they probably got the guy they needed. And with Justin Fields as your quarterback, you need this intermediate receiver, or rather tight end here, because we know what type of quarterback.
So in the third round, pick 73, they take Azare Thomas, the cornerback out of Florida State. This is a guy that I had a late first, early second round grade on. So I was pretty surprised that he was available here at pick 73. Very good player in press coverage, and he's got the speed to play man-to-man. This might have been the best pick for them in this draft.
It might just be, we know they lost DJ Reed. They have Sauce Gardner on the other side, and as of right now, that defense doesn't allow him to travel. However, that may change, but I thought it was a great pick for them, great value pick in the third round. A guy, like you said, that late first, second round grade.
Now, in the fourth round, they take Arian Smith, the wide receiver out of Georgia. Look, this guy just drops way too many balls. And not only that, Alex, there were better wide receivers still on the board, especially a guy like Jalen Royals was still available here. So not a big fan of this pick.
Yeah, and this is where you get into the problem where you started to reach. We knew this was a weaker wide receiver class than we've probably seen over the past 3, maybe even 4 years. I would have thought they probably would have looked at some more defense here, and if not specifically in the safety area, or if not there, I would have thought they might have gone back to the offensive line and maybe tried to find a guard.
Now, another player I want to highlight here in the fifth round, Francisco Mauigoa, the linebacker out of Miami, another player that I was able to see play live. This guy can really get downhill, and 46 total pressures last season. This was a nice value pick for the Jets here. And when I look at that pick and their third round pick, Thomas, I felt like those picks kind of saved this draft from being a complete disaster. I gave them a C+, not horrible, like I said, but man, not very impressive for the Jets here.
Yeah, I gave them a C+ as well. Those middle rounds, they really kind of fumbled a few things in those middle rounds, and I thought they should have gone in a different direction.
All right, the New England Patriots here, they had the 4th overall pick. They take Will Campbell, the offensive tackle out of LSU. Look, it might have been a little bit of a reach at 4, but they had to address the offensive line. They had to address that offensive tackle spot in particular. And my comp for him was Brian Bulaga, the former Packers offensive tackle, a guy who had a very nice career. If he ends up being a Brian Bulaga type player, I don't think anybody's going to be mad that they took him at 4 overall. In the second round, they take Travion Henderson at pick 38, the running back out of Ohio State, home run hitter, home run pick, explosive running back, and like I mentioned in an earlier episode, hands down the best pass blocking running back in this class. So this is a guy that's going to help Drake May in multiple different ways.
Yeah, I thought that the first 2 picks, they had to address left tackle. We know what it was there. And then they had to get more dynamic at running back and enter Travion Henderson. So I think you have 2 day 1 starters. And if anybody doesn't get excited about Will Campbell, I don't know what he's going to be, because he wasn't my number 1 tackle, but go look at his highlights when he talks about protecting the quarterback. That guy will die on the field protecting your quarterback.
Yeah, you got to love the passion, the work ethic, and everything you see from him. Absolutely, man. Now, in the third round, pick 69, they take Kyle Williams, the wide receiver out of Washington State. Another player that I was able to see live. Look, guys, I'm very fortunate here. I get to go see a lot of big-time college football players live. And this guy, if you guys haven't already noticed here with all the players I've mentioned, but big-time playmaker here. This guy can get open at all 3 levels of the field. He's a yards after the catch monster. And I think, Alex, maybe one of the best third-round picks in this entire draft.
I agree. I like the player. I wonder what is the thought process, because the Patriots continue to draft the same player, because we said similar things about Javon Baker last year, a guy that they barely used. Then they also drafted Jalen Polk last year. Kendrick Bourne is more of a possession receiver. He's not really fast. Kayshon Boutte finally actually showed some things that he showed us at LSU as a 6th round pick from 2023. They have a lot of players that just simply do the same thing. There's nothing different about a lot of the receivers he's drafted over the last 3 years. They just consistently drafted from Boutte to Polk to Baker to Williams. They just drafted this, and even Demario Douglas, depending on how you feel about him. A lot of these guys are bottom tier second, but mostly third receivers on most teams if they develop.
Now, in the third round, pick 95, they took Jared Wilson, the center out of Georgia. This was my number one ranked center in this class. Now, not a great center class this year, but when you get the number one center in the class at pick 95, I think this is another home run pick, a guy that might move into guard, but a really, really good player in the third round.
Yeah, again, like we know that they let go of David Andrews, their longtime center. They did bring in Garrett Bradbury from Minnesota. So, yeah, he's going to move around the line a lot, particularly between right guard and center, I guess, for the most part, is where he'll spend most of his time.
Now, before we move on, just two other players I want to mention here briefly. The fourth round, Joshua Farmer, the defensive tackle out of Florida State. This is a guy that can collapse the pocket, big physical player. And then in the sixth round, they take Andres Borregales, the kicker out of Miami. Look, this was the number 2 kicker in this draft. I thought it was a position they had to address here. So getting the number 2 kicker, late in the draft, I think is just a nice pick there too, to kind of round out your special teams. I came away pretty impressed with this Patriots class, Alex. I'm curious to hear what you think about this draft.
I gave them a B-. I just thought that they drafted a lot of the same people, like I said, 3 years in a row. But those first 2 picks to me are home run prospect picks. So I gave them a B. I can push it to a B+ if necessary, or rather push it to a B. Excuse me, if necessary, but I have them with a B-, and I do like the Joshua Farmer pick.
Yeah, there was just too many players that I like here, especially those, like I said, the first really 4 picks I thought were all home runs. And so when you hit your first 4 picks out of the park, it's hard not to get excited about the class. And then, like I mentioned, there was a couple later picks that I thought were some really nice value picks too. So I gave them an A-. I thought this was an outstanding draft for the Patriots. Now, let's finish up the draft grades here. Final one, the Miami Dolphins. Coming into this draft, I thought they needed safety, corner. I thought they could definitely address the offensive line. But then at pick 13, they take Kenneth Grant, the defensive tackle out of Michigan, a guy who's a nose guard at the next level. Very good player, but to me, this is a big reach at 13. And like I mentioned, they had multiple other positions that I thought they really needed to address before addressing nose tackle. So I was not a fan of this pick at all.
Yeah, and I like the player. You know how much I like the player, but I think this is a bet on Anthony Weaver. We know how a lot of Baltimore players talk about him when he was there as a player as well as a coach. So my assumption is they're hoping that he can coach him up. But like you said, I do agree with you. I thought he would have been a better fit in other places, similar like you had him with Harbaugh and the defensive staff over there. Just thought it would have been a better fit. I think it would have been a better fit someplace else. I like the player, but this is a guy that does have a motor problem. And in Miami, where there's going to be some losing, you have to be careful when you have a player like this because you can lose him early.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I like the player, don't like the fit, and I certainly don't like it that early because, like you said, the motor is an issue. The inconsistency is certainly an issue. Now, the guy has some dominant ability, but it's just, can you unlock it? And that's going to be a big question mark, especially taking a guy that early and ignoring some other parts of your team that I think really needed some help here. Now, in the second round, at 37 overall, they take Jonah Sabaine, the guard out of Arizona. This was a really good pick. I thought this was a nice bounce back here after that first round pick. And guys, just a reminder here, sign up for the free newsletter at pintglassfootball.com if you haven't already, and go ahead and read the scouting report on this guy that our offensive line analyst here at PGF wrote up on him. It's an in-depth breakdown of his game. Go there if you really want to learn more about this guy, but a really nice pick in the second round.
Yeah, I like that pick as well. Obviously, with Tua back there, you need to protect the quarterback. So anytime you get one of the top 3 to 4 guards in this draft, which was a big-time guard draft, you doing well.
Yeah, so in the fifth round, they didn't have a third or fourth round pick. Now, they had a trio of fifth round picks, but in the fifth round, I want to point out at pick 143, they took Jordan Phillips, the defensive tackle out of Maryland, a guy who also made my sleeper list. I talked about him on our sleeper episode recently. Great value in the fifth round. I like this kid.
Yeah, I like Jordan Phillips a lot. Shout out to Maryland. We know what was going to happen now that I said that. But as you continue to go through that, they double down triple down, however you want to look at it, on the running back, the speed running back again, and Ollie Gordon. And in the 7th, they pick up Quinn Ewers. But the funny thing, Brad, is drafting Kenneth Grant in the 1st, and then on the back end of the draft, you get Jordan Phillips and you get Zeke Biggers from Georgia Tech, who I thought is a nice pickup for them in the 7th round. They most definitely should have gone a different direction in the 1st round, especially when they run a true 3-4. And when you get down to where they picked that, you still had players on the board. Whether you like Shamar Stewart or not, he did grade out as that type of player. Or even if you wanted to take a chance on a James Pierce, I wouldn't have, but we're just talking about what was available. Or maybe you just should have simply gone offensive tackle there and gotten your tackle there as well.
Yeah, I'm with you. It kind of felt like they lacked direction. It didn't feel like they had much of a game plan on what they wanted to accomplish in this draft. And they were kind of all over the place. And you're right, taking 3 defensive tackles, ignoring some other positions of need. It was an odd draft for the Miami Dolphins. Now, Ollie Gordon, you mentioned in the 6th round, running back out of Oklahoma State. I think that's a very nice pick and could be a steal in the 6th round. This guy 2 years ago led the nation in rushing yards. Now, Quinn Ewers in the 7th round, the quarterback out of Texas. I know you like Ewers a lot more than I do. I just don't see a guy who can play in the NFL. Very, very hot and cold player, really struggles under pressure. I think he's a backup at best. So I get maybe taking a flyer on him, but kind of a wasted pick there, in my opinion.
You're not to interrupt you, Brad, but a wasted pick mainly because what was Quinn Ewers mostly at Tech? A lot of times at Texas. Hurt. You have a starting quarterback that is hurt. So I didn't understand. I could like the quarterback. The fit doesn't make sense, even if Mike McDaniel can sprinkle his pixie dust on them. Both of these guys have a injury problem.
Yeah, it's a valid point. Now, what was your draft grade for the Miami Dolphins?
I gave them a D+.
Wow.
I was confused again. Like we said, Ollie Gordon is a good value pick, but you got A-Chain, you got Jalen Wright last year. Now you go back, you get Ollie Gordon. There were other needs that were there. Your offensive line is putrid. It is not good. You still needed to address tackle, right? You still needed to address outside linebacker. Like I said, they got Kenneth Grant, I forgot to mention Jalon Walker was still on the board. So to your point, it sounded like there was a fight in half the room. It sounded like they were ping-ponging who was going to trade because there was no consistency to the draft.
Yeah, I had a C- written down. And it's funny, I considered going with a D grade. Some of those picks like Jordan Phillips and the fact that I really do like the guard out of Arizona they took in the 2nd round was really the only reason I bumped it up. But I'm with you. There's a lot to be desired with this Miami Dolphins draft. If you enjoy the podcast, do us a favor and subscribe, rate and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. But once again, I'm Brad Fowler. He's Alex Higdon. This is Pint Glass Football, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Pint Glass Football Podcast. Be sure to subscribe and follow us on Twitter at PGF Podcast.